Welcome to the Veterinary Marketing Podcast, where it's all about helping your veterinary practice attract, engage, and retain clients. Broadcasting a new podcast every Monday from sunny Southern California, here's your host, Brandon Bashirs.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to episode number 131 of the Veterinary Marketing Podcast. I hope you're having a fantastic day. Today, we're going to be talking all about podcasting. So I love podcasting. I think that there's so many good opportunities for a veterinary practice to use podcasting to create content to engage with their clients and attract new clients. So today's episode is all about the nuts and bolts of how to do the recording, what kind of equipment should you use, that kind of stuff. If you haven't listened to the last episode 130, about should you start one, what should you consider if you are going to start one, be sure to go back and listen to that one too, because I think that's going to be helpful for you. So my goal is that after you've listened to this, you can decide what your podcast is going to be about, what the frequency is, how you're going to be able to actually do it and put it together, the technical aspects, and then how to launch and promote it, which will be the next episode. So today we're going to just talk about all of the kind of technical things. So if you're not interested in podcasting, this episode is probably not going to be for you. If you ever want to create a podcast, and I think that almost every veterinary practice would benefit from having a podcast, then this is a good episode for you. So before we begin, I want to mention a few things. First, if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe in iTunes or in Google Play. And if you could do me a huge favor, please leave me an honest review. I would really appreciate it. If you haven't done so already too, be sure to go and check out my Facebook marketing group called the Veterinary Marketing Nerds. If you go to facebook.com/groups/the Veterinary Marketing Nerds, you can request to join there. There's a bunch of great discussions. I do marketing challenges there occasionally, and cool stuff's going on. I'm also going to be doing a group within the group of people who want to do podcasting and create a podcast to help them get their podcast launched. So be sure to go check that out if you're even thinking about it. The other thing that I'd like to mention is this episode is being sponsored by usedvetequipment.com. Head on over to usedvetequipment.com. It's a website created by Brad Haven. It's been around for 5 years now. And what Used Vet Equipment does is it brings buyers and sellers together. So do you have any kind of used equipment in your storage room that you're looking to sell? Or are you looking to save money by buying used? Everything from cages to kennels, x-rays, ultrasounds, surgery and laser equipment, lab equipment from IDEX or Baxis, tables, tubs, sinks, all kinds of miscellaneous items as well. So head on over there if you're looking to buy or sell. It's kind of like the eBay for vets. The website works really great. Brad's created a system so that both the buyers and sellers are happy with the transaction. You can go to usedvetequipment.com and read about all of the testimonials. And when you head on over there, be sure to let Brad know that you heard about it on the podcast. Thanks for supporting the sponsors of the podcast. They help to make the podcast possible. So thanks for sponsoring, Brad. All right, so let's get into today's episode. Today we're going to be talking all about specifically the technical aspects of creating a podcast. So what kind of equipment should you get? What kind of software should you use? How do you actually record it? What are the kind of puzzle pieces that you're going to need to put together in order to have a podcast? So last episode, we talked about why you should podcast if you're thinking about it, how often you should do it, what you should commit to get started. And I think that that's helpful. So assuming that you do want to create a podcast, remember that you're going to have to get to at least 10 episodes is what I suggested. So commit to going to 10 before you decide to stop and just get there. I would say, and two, we're going to talk about this on the next episode next week, is how many episodes you should have when you go to launch your podcast as well. So today is about the technical stuff, the equipment and things. And I think a lot of times when it comes to actually anything, content production-wise or, video production, audio production, everything, people kind of obsess about the equipment, and it makes it so that the equipment is kind of the most important part. When in reality, it's the content that is the most important part, I think. Now, podcasting is a little bit different. If you don't have a decent audio setup, people typically won't give you a chance because they're listening to the podcast in their cars or when they're working out. And if it just sounds awful, people won't give you a chance. But I will say this, that when I started my podcast, I was just using the speakers on my computer that were built in, and the audio quality is terrible. If you haven't ever listened to the first episode, it's terrible. I was terrible, and I'm embarrassed by it. But I like to have it up there because it reminds me everybody starts somewhere. And if you start out bad, that just means you have a lot to improve, and it's going to be okay. Luckily, some people listened, and some people gave me the time of day to be as guests on my podcast. And so I was able to kind of be encouraged and continue. But I think that if your heart is in the right place and that the content is good, then people are going to like it. And they'll give you a lot of leeway as far as production goes. But the good news is, if you're listening to this, you're thinking about starting it, you can be more intentional with how you create your content and create good quality content. So that's really what the equipment should do and how it should serve you and your podcast. So all of your equipment needs to make it so that it's as easy as possible to create high quality audio content. So what do you need to start with? Well, you can start with as little as your phone and the Anchor app, which is really, really cool. If you haven't done so, be sure to download the Anchor app. Check out all the podcasts on there, especially mine. You're definitely going to want to follow me. I will follow you back on Anchor. It's a pretty cool social network that is built around podcasting. My show on Anchor is called Titans of E-commerce. Just a quick plug there. But if you don't have anything in the budget to go out and buy some microphones and stuff, that's okay. You can start on your phone, and actually the audio quality is pretty good. It's definitely good enough to get your content out there and to get started. So don't let the equipment get in the way of stopping you. If you don't have anything set up yet, that's okay. But I just wanted to say that. If you have something that you really feel like you want to do and you want to get it out there, don't let the equipment be what stops you. Because I guarantee that you have what's good enough to start, which is your phone right now. So, assuming, though, that you want to put a little bit more production effort into it, what should you do? Well, the first thing that we should talk about, I think, are microphones. So microphones, there's a bunch of really high-quality microphones that are not very expensive at all. The one that I use for this podcast is made by a company called Blue. It's a Yeti Blackout Edition. It costs $120, which isn't very expensive. I have it on a shock mount with a boom arm that is adjustable, a Rode arm, and a shock mount that's built for this specifically. If you go to my website, the Veterinary Marketing Podcast, you can see a picture of what it looks like. It looks kind of cool, especially if you're making videos or things and you want to incorporate your microphone in there. It looks like a professional kind of microphone setup. The thing that I like about this, and when you're looking at microphones, make sure that you don't need a mixer. Unless you're technical with audio, like, for example, I'm not a technical person at all, but if you listen to Vet School Unleashed, which is Seth's podcast, he is like super good at audio stuff, specifically because I think he was majored, if I'm thinking correctly, and I'm sorry if I'm not thinking about this correctly, Seth, but I think he was an audio production something in college, or did some kind of stuff with music, which is pretty cool, before he decided to change and become a vet. So I'm pretty sure that's him. And yep, I was just looking it up. Seth did have a Bachelor of Music degree from University of Miami, where he studied business and music. So anyways, if you haven't listened to the episode with Seth or checked out his podcast, head on over there and make sure you check out his podcast, especially if you're in vet school or recently graduated. Okay, so back on topic here. If you just want to be simple and have high quality for most bang for your buck, you're going to want to go for a USB microphone. So there are microphones that have like audio setup where you hook it in and it has a mixer and you have to adjust the audio levels and things like that. That's too much work, and I think that kind of benefit that you're going to gain from having the extra level of audio control is not going to be any return. So make sure you're going for a USB microphone. Now, the most popular ones for recording podcasts specifically are made, I think, by Blue, is probably one of the biggest microphone producers, but also the Audio-Technica is also a really good brand as well, and that's one that people use all the time. It's called the ATR 2100. It's a USB microphone that plugs in. So the benefit of having a USB microphone is you don't have to have a mixer. You just plug it right in and it goes. I think that's what you should really focus on. So when I started, I just used my speakers from the computer, which is awful audio quality. Then I upgraded to a Blue Snowflake, which is a tiny little foldable travel microphone, and it was okay. It was a way better step up than the computer speakers. And then from there, I got the Yeti Blue microphone. So I didn't let the equipment stand in the way of creating the podcast, which was helpful in getting started and making sure that it was something that I wanted to do before I kind of dove all in. In the past, I've kind of gone all in with purchases, and then so if you're like that at all, probably want to start out before you build up your arsenal of audio equipment. So that being said, I really like my Yeti Blue mic, and the setup with the shock mount is very affordable to get as well. So another great option is called the Blue Snowball, and it's like a little circle. It looks like a snowball. But another mic that I also really, really like is the Zoom H4n, which is a mobile unit that's not necessarily hooked up to anything that you can take. It's battery powered. It uses external SD cards. The only thing with that is that I have to then take the SD card and make sure I don't lose it and things like that. So it adds a level of complexity, and I like things to be simple. So I would say, though, that the audio quality on that Zoom H4n is really, really high quality. It's a $200 unit, and so if you're going to be doing podcast episodes on the go or things, that is definitely, I can't recommend that one enough, just from an audio quality standpoint. So whatever you're going to choose, make sure that it works with how your podcast is going to be set up. If you're going to be interviewing people, and it's not going to be in person, like it's going to be on Skype, I use a tool called Ecamm Call Recorder, and that works for my Mac as well as PC, but you use it on your Skype. When you Skype people, it automatically records the conversation. And so that's pretty cool because it allows you to create that without getting too technical. I've tried using GarageBand with my iMac, and it's difficult for me because I'm honestly not that technical of a person when it comes to like hardware specifically. So if you're like that and you don't want to have to mess with things, just get the tools that are going to let you kind of get the stuff done that you're looking for. So for interviews, I have used in the past GoToWebinar, which is the call quality is not the greatest for sure. It sounds like people are calling in on a phone, and that's probably not the best. That's why I switched over to Skype and Ecamm, because it was helpful to get the higher quality of audio. Some people will ask that you record 2 tracks and then mix them together. That's actually how Seth does his podcast, and that's why his podcast has such high production value, because he's really good at audio stuff. But for me, I'm not very technical, and so I just use these tools that I mentioned here. So choose a microphone. I would go for something mid-range between $80 and $120, and that'll be good. The thing that I like about my microphone too is that it has different settings. You can adjust the gain, which is how sensitive the microphone is, and you can also adjust the direction from which the sound is coming. So if you have a 2-person interview, you can change it to the settings so that each side of the microphone picks up different sound, or it can be an all-inclusive like circle where it's taking sound from every way, or it can just be a front-on directional microphone. So that is just some tips there for you when it comes to equipment. Another thing that works well, and I actually know some people who do podcasts, is they just use their iPhone to record it, and they use a Rode lavalier microphone that just clips on to their shirt, and they talk into it, and it's actually really high-quality audio as well. With that, I would say you're going to have to be sure to not have too much movement, not be in the wind, and make sure that the microphone is consistently in the same spot. Otherwise, you're going to get highs and lows and all kinds of things. So if you want to kind of be on the go, I would say choose a Zoom H4n, and that will cover you. Or if you're going to do a USB setup with a computer, then I would suggest, I really am happy with the Blue mic. So those are my suggestions for you. But don't let the equipment get in the way. So overall, just go for a USB mic. Okay, moving on to the next thing. So first, kind of how do we create the podcast? We have to record the content, right? So we need the microphone. We also need audio recording software. The one that I use is called Audacity. And Audacity is a free audio recording software that you can get on SourceForge. There's a bunch of other softwares. I like Audacity because it's free. It's kind of simple to use, and it just creates audio tracks that you can then edit. You can also do all kinds of cool presets, and it does a lot of cool things. I actually don't use that. I probably should have set that up. After 131 episodes, it would have had a higher return on investment to set it up once and not have to worry about it. So Audacity is pretty simple, though. You just hit the record button. You can do multiple channels, and you can edit. And you can have stereo tracks or single tracks, and It's just a great piece of software that works and doesn't have any problems. So that's why I like it. It's simple to use and simple to learn. So that is important. The next thing that is important when you're creating your content is that typically you have highs or lows. So if you've ever noticed, like, what's really annoying, you're watching TV, right? And you have to turn down the TV because it's a loud movie. And then when the commercial comes on, it's like 15 times louder than the show you're watching, especially if you have kids. It always happens, and then it wakes up the kids, and it's annoying, right? Same thing can happen in your podcast. So if you're interviewing people, or if you have an intro and then you have content, typically the volume is not mastered automatically unless you're super good at setting up your gain and things. But your audio is going to have highs and lows, and you're going to want to make sure that it's not too loud or too soft. And so in order to do that, it's called mastering your audio tracks, making it all the same level. You use a program that's called Auphonic, which is AUPHONIC, auphonic.com, and it lets you master your audio tracks for free. It gives you 2 hours for free. If you want to have more than 2 hours of content, then you have to pay for the software there. But it works really good. Like, for example, the intro on this podcast is really, really loud because the person who created it mastered it, so I have to match the audio levels for my speaking so that you don't have to go and turn down the podcast really low when it first starts and then turn it up in order to hear me. So anyways, going on, that's something that's really important. It helps you to have a higher production value, and it's free. So unless you're creating more than 2 hours of content, which is probably not likely unless you're going to get into some long episodes or things, it's definitely something that you're going to want to do. It's very simple. So the way that it works is you just take your finished WAV file, is typically how I export my podcasts, and then I upload it into Auphonic and then download the master file, and then typically I'll download that file into an MP3 format. Now the reason why I do MP3 format is because when I put the podcast into my hosting, which is done through Libsyn, and I'll explain why I do that in just a minute, that hosting, if it's an MP3 file, it gives more data to the podcast plugin that I use. So the way that iTunes and Google Play works is that they're not actually hosting anything. You don't put the file in iTunes or Google Plus. The file is hosted somewhere else. So specifically, there's podcast hosting, because it takes a lot of bandwidth, right? So you have these audio files, and when somebody plays it, it downloads that audio file onto those people's phones. So basically, like iTunes and Google Play for podcasts are just RSS feeds. And so all iTunes does is tells the phone, hey, get the feed from here. It's formatted in a certain way and it's published, but it's not hosted through us. Hopefully that makes sense. So when you're putting your podcast up, if you have a lot of people that are downloading your podcast, it can take a ton of bandwidth, especially when you release an episode. Typically, the first couple days have the most downloads just because people's phones automatically download them. And so it would really slow down your website if you had all of that on your own server. And a lot of times veterinary practices don't have robust server setups just because they don't have a tremendous amount of traffic. So if you, let's say, had 200 or 300 downloads in a day, it would probably really slow you down, and you don't want that to happen. So that's why I suggest getting hosting services, right? So the hosting service that I suggest is Libsyn. It's really, really affordable. It has a lot of great analytics. It has a lot of great features where it will auto promote to different areas, and we'll talk about promotion in the next episode, so I'm not going to get super into it. But Libsyn is great. Another one that's good is SoundCloud. SoundCloud is a great service that's free, or it's very cheap to get the paid features as well. You can do it for free though, and the free works great. The only thing is you can't replace your audio files, you can't get advanced analytics and stuff like that. But if you're just starting out, the free SoundCloud option is fantastic. And then you can also use Anchor, which does have a desktop uploader now with no time limits and all kinds of cool features. So Anchor's cool. The only problem with Anchor that I don't like versus the other options is you don't have control over your feed like you do with Libsyn or SoundCloud. So, for example, if you want to put the podcast episodes on your website, I would say go with Libsyn. And the reason for that is because Libsyn or SoundCloud, I should reference that, because with the way that my podcast works is that my website's on WordPress. I use a podcasting plugin that's called Blueberry, and it basically takes the link that I get from Libsyn, and then I paste it into my plugin area. It updates the length of the podcast, and then all of the posts that are in the website section called podcast, and I know this is getting a little bit complicated, but all of those posts are then fed into the iTunes feed. So iTunes takes my feed, which is veterinarymarketingpodcast.com/podcast, and anything that's updated in that feed, which was created by the Blueberry podcast plugin for WordPress, then gets published into iTunes. So that plugin specifically formats everything properly, and it tells iTunes and Google Play where to find my podcast, how often it's updated, and how often it should check. So that's a really cool plugin. So thinking about how you're going to distribute it is going to be important. We'll talk about distribution again next episode, like I mentioned. But we'll just do a quick rundown of the whole process of podcasting before we wrap up here. So the way that you do your podcast, first you have to record it, create the content however you're going to create it with your microphone, edit it inside of Audacity. Then once you've created and edited your file down, what you do next is you upload it to Auphonic and get it all mastered so that it's not high or low. Once that's done, you download it, put it into your hosting service, whether it's Libsyn or SoundCloud. Once that's done, you take that file and then you either put it on your website, or SoundCloud can actually directly publish to iTunes and Google Play as well. So that's one thing that's kind of cool about SoundCloud. Same thing with Anchor, is that you'll publish from your feed directly. Now with mine, I put my content on my website, and then the feed is submitted from my website to iTunes and Google Play. So from start to finish, that's how you do it. When I started out, typically it would take me between 4 to 6 hours to create an episode. Now I'm down to between 2 and 4 hours, depending on the topic. If I know the topic down, I don't have to look anything up, and I can just kind of go off just from what I know and talking about it. Or if I have to do research, it takes a little bit longer. Especially when I started out, the episodes took a lot longer to produce. But now I've got it down pretty well. I know what to say. I know how it goes. And as time goes on, you'll find that it gets easier and you'll get faster and more efficient. So let me know if you have any questions. I hope that today's episode was useful and helpful for you. If you're thinking about starting a podcast, send me a message or comment in the group, the Facebook group. I'd be happy to take a look at what you're doing, or if you want any input or anything, be sure to comment and leave me a message there. So if you have any questions, any comments, or need help with anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, if you could do me a huge favor, be sure to subscribe in iTunes and Google Play and leave me an honest review. I would really, really appreciate it. And be sure to tune in to next week's episode, where we're going to talk about distribution, what you should do to help optimize your podcast. Because when it comes down to it, iTunes and Google Play, they're actually just big search engines. So they're utilities for sure, but they're search engines, the way that they function and how to get found and things like that. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about where to post it on your website, how to use the content once you have it, all kinds of good things. All right, so I'll see you on next week's episode. Have a fantastic week.